The Constitutional Convention. We'll talk about some of the problems under the Articles of Confederation and then get to the actual convention. So, what can we say about the Articles of Confederation? Well, overall, they created a weak central government. They created an ineffective central government with lots of problems. Critics, people frustrated with the Articles of Confederation, want a stronger central government. People's complaints varied from region to region, occupation to occupation, social class to social class. But most people were frustrated over the lack of economic growth. Jobs aren't being created, wealth isn't being created, Americans aren't prospering like they think they should be. One group that is especially critical of the Articles of Confederation is known as the Nationalists, and they pointed out that the national government lacked the power to do enough about some of the important problems facing the nation. They pointed out how the economy was floundering, and they said a big problem with that is that Congress had no power to regulate trade. There are trade restrictions and trade barriers between different states. States were actually putting tariffs on goods from other states. That's restricting trade in the United States. Also, Americans aren't buying American-made goods anymore. Now that the war is over and the boycott is ended, the British merchants have returned with lots and lots of cheap British goods to buy. In fact, Americans are even buying on credit at the end of the war and immediately after the war from British goods. All of these problems could be solved if Congress had more power to regulate trade, but that wasn't the case under the Articles of Confederation. Another problem is that the government owed money. The government had sold bonds, had taken out loans basically from individuals during the war. How are they going to pay that off when the central government cannot collect money? Also, during the war, the government had printed money, which is now virtually worthless. The states under the Articles of Confederation are doing the same, printing their own money, and that has very little value. The central government owes money to some of its soldiers, it owes money to its citizens who bought bonds, and it owes money to foreign investors who bought bonds, but the central government wasn't allowed to tax. Some of the leading nationalists call for some major constitutional reforms, and this debate was led by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. And it first centered on whether or not the new country would ever be able to pay its debts. They proposed an import tax known as the Impost of 1781. So they would collect a tax on all imported goods, basically a tariff. This would be used to pay back that national debt we were just discussing. Under this plan, the national government, not the state governments, would pay, and therefore the people would become loyal to the national government. This almost passes under the Articles of Confederation, but it's defeated by one vote. Remember, you need major support under the Articles of Confederation. 9 out of the 13 states to pass a bill and unanimous support to pass an amendment. The Impost of 1781 is defeated by one vote. Meanwhile, in foreign affairs, the United States is really being embarrassed on the national stage. Congress claimed that lands occupied by the Spanish and English, in foreign affairs, Congress is being embarrassed. The United States is being embarrassed on the national stage. Down in the South, you can see that shaded region where Alabama and Mississippi would be today. Congress claimed that those lands were part of the United States, were the property of the United States. But they're being occupied by the Spanish, and they're being occupied by the British. Now, Congress had a good claim to those lands, but they don't have the power to challenge those European nations for control of that land. Meanwhile, as part of the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War, the United States promised to pay the debt owed to Britain. But states are dragging their feet on making their citizens pay that agreed debt to Britain. In response, Britain is dragging their feet on vacating the Northwest Territory. The British continue to occupy forts in today what we would call the Midwest. This makes it really hard for people to move out and settle there when there's British soldiers there. Also, Spain is ignoring that southern border, that border of Spanish Florida. Spain is moving beyond that and even pushing into Georgia. Also, Spain controls the Mississippi River and closes the lower half of the Mississippi River. They tell American farmers they are not allowed to use the Mississippi River, which is very important for trade. Internal affairs, domestic affairs are not much better, and Congress's control over the nation is suspect. Some people are really questioning it. Some states don't even bother sending delegates to Congress under the Articles of Confederation because they feel it's powerless and pointless, which leads to major delays because if you don't have enough delegates in Congress, you can't do any official business. You don't have a quorum, so you have a delay while Congress waits for quorum. And under the Articles of Confederation, there's no permanent capital. The capital bounces around from New York to Philadelphia to, I think, even Baltimore. And so it's confusing and problematic. So, the Articles of Confederation are too ineffective to help with commerce, and they're too weak to help the minority, the wealthy class, against majority rule. This is what James Madison argues. These are the problems that James Madison is going to point out with the Articles of Confederation. And Madison assuages some of the fears that people have about building a stronger central government. There's real worry, there's real concern that a strong central government in a large republic like the United States could not work. The idea was that it would become corrupt, that no matter where you put the capital, it would be far away from enough people, that it would become corrupt and not responsive to the needs of the people. Madison, however, persuaded a lot of people that it could work. Madison pointed out that in a large republic, you would have a lot of competing factions trying to gain power, and those competing factions would cancel each other out. Those competing factions would prevent any one group or person from gaining too much power. In May of 1786, James Madison initiates what's known as the Annapolis Convention, where delegates were sent from states to discuss the trade problems under the Articles of Confederation. And all they really accomplished at this meeting was that they realized that the problems were bigger than what they could solve, and they agreed to hold another meeting again the following year in 1787. That fall, in Massachusetts, we have what's known as Shays' Rebellion, where farmers in western Massachusetts revolted against the wealthy. Farmers were struggling to pay their bills, they were having their farms foreclosed and their property seized, so the farmers were upset and said, this is a result of a bad economy. We can't do anything about it. You've got to stop taking our farms. So the farmers took control of a lot of the courthouses and government offices to prevent further farm foreclosures. Well, that's good for the farmers. It's bad for the people who own the banks. It's bad for the people that are expecting that money in rent payment. So the wealthy class raises a private army. Many of the Boston elite pay for this army to go put down Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion is a symbol to the nation. It's a signal that there has been a breakdown in economic order. When people can't pay their debts, they should have their property seized. They shouldn't be allowed to just have a rebellion and fight their way out of debt. Shays' Rebellion sends a message to the nation that a solution to these economic problems is urgently needed.